So as y'all know, I'm finishing up the writing process for my first book, Dating Disability. One of the most fun things is that the book is such a living, breathing document. And I was just on this webinar where someone asked me about stigma and shame around disability. And one of the things I told them was, growing up, I was very self-conscious of the way I walked because of the lack of representation around disability and the internal fear of not wanting to be different. And it reminded me of this story that I now have to put in the book it's a little sad, but I'm going to share it because I think it's helpful for people who may be experiencing the same thing. But when I was telling this on the webinar, what it took me back to is my predominant narrative in my 20s when I was dating I have vivid memories of sitting at a bar. There's one bar I always used to go to in DC over and over and over again. But I remember several times sitting at that bar and meeting a guy would sit down next to me. We would start talking, I would be flirting. We'd be interested in each other romantically. And then the time would come where I had to go to the bathroom. And I remember a lot of times in my head, what would be running through my head is like, oh my God, what is he gonna think when I get up and he sees how I walk? And that is a very destructive internal narrative to tell yourself. And it's one that, I'm going to talk in the book about how I worked through getting past that. But it was helpful on this webinar to be reminded that is in and of itself a story that needs to go in the book because it's just a very literal representation of how shame manifests. And then when we, move towards how can we bust out of this shame prison I've talked about some, it's correcting that narrative of like the way I walk is a beautiful thing and it's different. And if somebody has a problem with that, then they are not the person for me. It was great to have that moment on the webinar kind of tie in with the book and help me keep going in my writing. So the book is divided into 3 parts. And the first part is what I like to call Emily 1.0, that sort of iteration of myself growing up as a teenager and in my 20s. And that section is going to tell the story of stories like me being in a bar and fearing how men would react to me walking when I get up off a bar stool. Part 2 of the book is going to be really my journey during the COVID-19 pandemic, living in California and sort of recognizing that I needed to understand who I am as a woman with a disability and understand that identity and how I worked through overcoming the shame that I felt around not only who I was as a woman with a disability, but also who I was sexually and in romantic relationships. And then part 3 is a toolkit for anyone to use. And even if people don't care at all about my story, you can skip part 1 and part 2 and go right to part 3, because part 3 is gonna be very tactical tools of how to overcome shame, how to build your self-awareness, and how to correct your internal narrative, so that you have better relationships with others. I can't share which publisher I've decided to go with quite yet because I'm still talking to a few, but I can share that whoever I go with, we are going to have a pre-order capability for the book probably starting in November, December. So if you didn't pre-order it through the Publishizer campaign, you're going to be able to pre-order it soon, again, through the publisher website. And then the plan is for my book, Dating Disability, to be officially published in July 2025 to coincide with Disability Pride Month. You're going to be able to pre-order it soon. In the meantime, I'm going to have a lot of exciting webinars and different events coming up that you can join around disability and dating and shame.